temp directory, and that's going to prevent a lot of malware from running, in my opinion, at least.
So what do you install or you know, or do to detect or prevent malware on your personal computer?
I don't run Windows.
So malware's not a problem in Linux, right?
Oh, no, absolutely not. Yeah, malware. There's malware for every system. It may not be as prevalent in Linux, and it may not be prevalent in Mac as it is in Windows, but they're there. Anybody who tells you otherwise is probably trying to sell you something.
Yeah.
It's funny because I was reading about the new Google Chromebooks that have been coming out, and actually on Google's site it says Google Chromebooks don't need to run antivirus because there's no malware for them. And all I could think of was there probably is, but it's just not prevalent enough that you need to worry about it.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, there's a really great site called I think it's something like vx.netluz.org or something like that, but it's a virus archive, and it has viruses going back to some of the very first computer viruses that were created, and they've got viruses on there for pretty much every operating system in existence, even mainframes. So, everybody has to worry about malware. I don't care if you're running Linux, if you're running Windows or Mac or whatever operating system you're running, there's something out there you're going to have to, make sure that you're smart about it and that you help, you take the right precautions to, not do stupid things and get yourself infected.
So
there you go. Bring back BOS.
There you go. So you mentioned there's a lot of reverse engineering involved when you're analyzing malware. If Christmas is coming up and the wife says, what do you want for Christmas? And I was like, maybe this would be a good time for me to ask for a copy of IDA Pro. And then I looked at the price, and it is not prohibitively expensive, but not something I necessarily would want my wife spending money on me. If I had to do any kind of reverse engineering and didn't have IDA Pro, are there options for you if you wanted to, get into the business of doing this?
Sure. Well, the nice thing about IDA Pro is that there's actually a free version of IDA Pro from the Hexray's website. It's not the most current version, but it's still fairly recent. I can't remember what version it is. I think the latest version of IDA Pro that you can buy right now is like 6.4 or 5 or 6 or something like that. And I want to say that the free version is like 6.0, or maybe it's 5.0 or 5.5 or something like that, but it's still not that old, where you can still use it to do a lot of stuff.
Okay.
If you didn't want to use the free version, there's also a limited trial of the current version that you can download on a limited basis. So you can definitely use those. And then there are other disassemblers out there which are probably not as good, in my opinion, as IDA Pro, because I think IDA Pro is probably the industry standard. But there are others which are still pretty good. So there's one called the Hopper, which is actually really good at analyzing OS X binaries and iOS binaries, things along those lines. There's a couple free disassemblers out there, which honestly, their names escape me right now. But
I knew about Ollie Debug. That was one I heard about. It does well for 32-bit, but it doesn't do 64-bit binaries, if I remember correctly. They're still working on that. That's an alpha.
Yeah, so Ollie Debug actually is a debugger. It's not a disassembler. There's actually a difference between the two, where a debugger will let you run the program and put breakpoints in it and modify the program, and you're basically stepping through the program itself as you're running it. A disassembler will take the program and actually converts it from the machine code to its assembler, so you can read the assembly of that program. Now, there's definitely some capabilities overlap between the two, where in order for a debugger to work properly, it's going to be taking that machine code and it's going to be reversing it to assembler for you so you could see it. So yeah, you could technically use a debugger as a disassembler, although it's probably not as easy. And most of the disassemblers out there, like IDA Pro, have built-in debuggers as well.
Okay.
But Ollie Debug is great. Like you said, for 32-bit. I think Ollie Debug 2.0, which is in alpha or beta or something like that, can do some 64-bit. There's also a Immunity debugger, which is great. It's kind of an upgraded version. They actually took or the creators of that actually took Ollie Debug and kind of fixed a lot of bugs and added a lot of capabilities to it. And there are excuse me, there are a bunch more. I mean, there's GDB, there's the Microsoft debugger, oh man, or WinDebug. So I mean, there's a lot out there that you can use for free to get started with this.
Wow. So I guess I just needed to pack a big lunch because I just got schooled or something. So. All right.
So if I suspect an infection on workstations in my company, what should I do? What are some of the first things I need to do?
Well, if you suspect that there's something going on, you need to make sure that you verify that there actually is something. I've been called into times when an organization thinks that they're infected, and it turns out that and everybody's in panic mode. They're going around, they're freaking out. They want to take down 100 different desktops, and it turns out that instead somebody just pushed out a bad driver, a bad printer driver, and that's what's causing all these issues. So you want to take the time to make sure that you perform the analysis to determine if the malware is actually on the system. And there are a number of things that you can do to do that. This kind of falls back into the traditional forensic and network monitoring techniques that a lot of people are familiar with. So get on the system, look for any weird processes or services that are running that shouldn't be there. Run a tool like Microsoft's Auto Runs, which kind of dumps everything that gets automatically started in there, and look for anything unusual in that list. Get on your network and see if there's anything unusual coming out of that system network-wise. Proxy servers are great for that because if malware 9 times out of 10 wants to communicate with something over the internet, it wants to phone back home, and if you have a proxy set up, it's probably going to be going through your proxy server to do that. And hopefully you have the logs turned on that you can tell, you can see the malicious traffic going in and out, and then hopefully a lot of times once you determine like the malicious web servers is going to, one or two Google searches later will have a list of probably where the malware is on that system, and you can jump on the system and see if it's there. Beyond that, like I said, you're kind of doing the traditional forensics that I think a lot of people are used to doing. Doing file analysis, or I'm sorry, timeline analysis on the system, looking for unusual files. Dumping the memory from the system and putting it into something like volatility to see if you can find memory, or I'm sorry, see if you can find the malicious processes in memory, and so on. So you definitely want to answer your original question, you definitely want to make sure it's on there. And once you find it on there, I think, in my opinion, the smart move is to take that malware off and start analyzing it to figure out how you can detect it on other systems. If it's as simple as it always drops itself into the same directory or as the same file name, then all you have to do is look on all your systems for that file and get that file off, and you don't have to reimage 1,000 different systems. If it's a little more complicated, where it always has different files, but it always beacons out to the same URL, then look at your proxy logs and find which systems are beaconing out to that URL, and so on.
So, we're talking about malware on Windows, and we mentioned malware on the Linux side. Where have you found malware hiding on Linux boxes? Does it hide in plain sight? I know it's not as easy to hide, because dev has pretty much every device inside of that as a file or whatever. Where do you mostly find malware hiding? Is it just stuck in the home directory somewhere or in a temp folder?
Yeah, I've seen it all over the place. When I first started looking at malware and doing malware analysis and incident response, the Linux boxes that I would find that were infected, the bad guys would do something like create a directory in /dev where the directory was like dot dot space. And then hide everything under that, because that's easy to miss.
Sure.
If you're just doing a quick directory listing, but a lot of times they'll create a hidden directory, which on Linux or Unix or whatever, it's just dot whatever, and it's hidden by default. They'll create a hidden directory or name the file dot something, and then that's a lot of times what it is. Sometimes they'll do things like hide in plain sight, so they'll throw down a Perl script, but call it like HTTPD. And so when they run it, if you just did a quick process listing on a web server, you'd see a whole bunch of HTTPD processes running, and you wouldn't necessarily see the malicious one right away.
That's interesting. Okay.
And that still gets down into rootkits, because rootkits were the first rootkits were on Linux systems to hide files and processes and network connections, and they're still around. There are still rootkits that get loaded on all different types of systems to hide the malware on that system, and at that point you're kind of looking for the rootkit to figure out where it's hiding things.
Yeah. Do you ever see them as a kernel module or something that gets loaded in as a kernel module?
Oh yeah, usually if the rootkit's any good, it's going to be some type of kernel module.
Okay.
Where it gets loaded in the kernel, and so it can hide the things at that level, as opposed to the user level, where it could be easier to get for an analyst to get around that.
All right. So you mentioned earlier about malware database, virus archive, the virus totals of malware. If those don't exist, and let's say you're bored one night and you wanted to analyze some malware and you wanted to find something that was in the wild and not detected, where would you go to find these kinds of things? Would you go to IRC, or do you know people who are working on things that would just go, hey, here's something, take a look at it? I mean, how do you get the information, or how do you get the malware that you test or analyze?
It's an underground community, right?
It's probably pretty underground, I would imagine. Yeah.
Well, it is and it isn't. I mean, it's the type of thing where you need to know somebody in the community in order to get into it. But you can't really know anybody in the community until you get into the community.
Sure.
So you kind of have to stumble into it a little bit. A lot of people, I think what they do is they'll kind of start making a name for themselves by throwing up a blog somewhere and just start doing malware analysis and posting their results on there, which is a great thing to do. I think that's kind of how I got started as well.
Sure.
But there are some places where you can go and get malware to analyze without having to be in some vetted community. Sorry, you can probably hear me typing. I'm trying to pull up some of these places.
That's okay. I'm surprised you haven't heard me typing already, because I've been looking up a lot of these things you've been telling me about.
So there are a number of different websites which kind of specialize in looking at malicious URLs and malicious web servers. One of them is malwaredomainlist.com. And then there's another one called urlquery.net. And both of these, you can go to those websites and they'll have just lists and lists of web servers which are serving up malware. Sometimes they actually have the links to the actual malware themselves. Other times they'll kind of be links to those malicious attack toolkits that I was talking about before. So you can go there and you can find current places which are serving up malware. Now understand. I want to throw that warning out there that these are actual live malware sites. So don't be clicking on those links and going in a browser. If you're going to do it, use something like wget or curl or something like that to download it and analyze it that way.
Okay.
Then there are other places which are essentially just huge databases of malware that you can download. So one of them, which I'm trying to find right now,
is this used to be malware that you'll control or that you can create? Or
sometimes, actually.
Okay.
So You are you talking about
Well,
uh,
what you're fixing to
like
bring up, I don't understand. This is malware that if you go down and execute, you could have a rootkit on your system.
oh yeah, absolutely,
Okay.
and that's why you should do it on a system that's dedicated for malware analysis.
All
It's
right.
it's that VM that you've specifically set up. I would never recommend you just doing this on your work laptop that you
Sure.
check email and do your banking on and all that. Do this on make sure you have a specific system for malware analysis. And I mean I like I said, I don't run Windows. Actually, that's a lie. I do have one laptop that I run Windows, so I can run games on it. But um, everything else is either Linux or Mac. And if I'm going to download some malware, I'm just going to do it from Linux command line.
Mm-hmm.
There's still some inherent risk with that. I mean, I think a couple of weeks ago there was a vulnerability that came out in wget, which could
Oh yeah.
execute uh, stuff locally on your system.
Yep.
You're still at risk, but you take the steps that you need to in order to reduce that risk as much as possible.
I'll be
Um,
reimaging my machine tomorrow.
So are there any on those sites? Are there's any rating system or like it kind of gives you some ideas to what it does? Like, oh, this one will start a Bitcoin miner, or this one will connect back to a WordPress blog and as a command and control or anything like that.
not really. So like the malware domain list and URL query, they do have some descriptions on there, but they're usually pretty brief. They're like exploit kit or iframe to an exploit kit or a Zeus bot or something like that. It's
Okay.
not going to give you like full in-depth analysis. Um, then there are other sites that there's a site called Open Malware. If you just Google Open Malware, you'll find it. It's a database. Um, in Georgia Tech, which has probably a couple million malware samples that you could query and download based off of like their antivirus name.
Okay.
Those are going to just tell you what malware you're dealing with. When you want to get to things like what it's doing, that's when you have to start looking at places like Threat Expert or Nubis, the online sandboxes which publish their results publicly. Um, and when I mentioned before that when you find the URL that the malware is beaconing to, if you go and you Google that, if it's a no malicious URL, eventually it's gonna lead you to one of those sites where somebody had uploaded it to one of these public sandboxes, and the results are out there, so you can see what it does without having to analyze it excuse me yourself. Um, but the great thing about that too is if you're just kind of doing this on your own, and you're not sure if you're doing the analysis correctly, you can find where somebody else has done the analysis or uploaded it to one of these sites and kind of compare it to what you found to figure out, did I see everything that the malware was doing? Did my malware do something a little bit different than it did on the sandbox? Why did it do that, and so on. So just kind of keep going down that rabbit hole to figure out what's going on.
Okay.
So I use Sandboxy, and I tell all my family to use it. Is that a good thing to do, or have you seen malwares escape something like that?
I haven't seen anything escape Sandboxy. Um, what's interesting is I actually have seen malware look to see if it's running in that, and if it is, then it kills itself.
Mm-hmm.
So a number of apparently analysts use that when performing malware analysis to kind of sandbox any malware that they come across. So it must work well enough that the bad guys know that they don't want to be running in it. Uh, I haven't seen anything try to break out of that, but I have seen malware try to break out of, or have the code to try to break out of virtual machines,
Mm-hmm.
like VMware. Um, Most of the time, at least when I've seen that stuff, they've been like really old exploits that only work on really old versions of VMware. So as long as you're running something current, it's probably not going to work. But yeah, malware will, there's always the possibility it's going to try to break out of anything that you have.
So you do malware analysis for you do it a specific way. Do you ever hear of people doing analysis in different ways? Do they use, say, QEMU because the malware they're looking at will notice that you're running VM tools and not run? I mean, or they use Box or something else for emulation, or maybe they use different method. Is there other than Mastiff? I mean, is there a specific framework like a Stride or a Dread type of framework that you can follow, or a PTES format when doing malware analysis?
Yeah, I mean there are. There's lots of different. Oh, sorry, my brain kind of got a little scattered there. There's definitely hundreds of different ways that you can analyze malware. You know, I'm not. I will never say that the way that I do it is the right way. Um, I just kind of have gotten into a groove, and this is what works for me, and so this is why I use VirtualBox and
Mm-hmm.
you know all that. But you know, there are other techniques, like you said, using QEMU or using Box or something else like that, which you can use to kind of get around some of the detections that malware uh, put into place to detect that they're being analyzed. You know, I've seen a lot of malware try to detect that they're in VirtualBox or VMware, but not as much try to detect that they're in QEMU or Zen or Box. So, you know, understanding how to use those other tools to perform your analysis is really key, I think, to you know being successful at what you're doing. I'm not sure if I answered your question or not, though.
No, that works. I mean, I didn't know if there was a because when we learned pen testing, it was like you do recon, you do X, you do Y, you do Z. I didn't know if there was something like that for malware where one, you've got to get the malware somehow, and then two, you would do, I don't know, open it in a disassembler, and then you know I didn't know if there was a specific way that people go about uh, doing analysis. So it seems like it's a pretty free form thing. It just whatever works for you to get the job done is how you do it.
Oh yeah, absolutely. I don't think that they, I guess the methodologies
Yeah.
for malware analysis are as well defined as for something like pen testing. Because like you said, you know, with pen testing, you do reconnaissance and then you know all that enumeration
Mm-hmm.
and,
Mapping
and
and
all
yeah.
that. Yeah, exactly. With malware analysis, I think it's a bit more ad hoc. I mean, you're still going to go through the same techniques to do things. You're still going to do the static analysis and you're still going to do dynamic analysis. Um, but what you do really varies for every single malware that you're looking at. So you're going to do static analysis a little bit differently on a Windows executable than you will in a Microsoft Office, you know, Word document. And you're going to do the dynamic analysis differently. Um, the same concepts of what you're trying to get at still apply. Um, so so when I teach my class, I try to do some go through some type of methodology and then show all the different tools and techniques for different file types for those for that methodology. So for like static analysis, you're going to do things like you're going to do hashing. You're going to create cryptographic hashes of the malware and then use those hashes to find information out about it. Typically, you take those hashes and you Google them to see if anybody else has analyzed that, or you're going to create fuzzy hashes.
Mm-hmm.
And then you'll move on to the next step where you're doing an embedded strings analysis where you're pulling out the embedded strings within the malware to get information as to what it could be doing. Then you're doing things like format specific header analysis. So like the PE header you're going to analyze, and you're going to look at the import address table, and you're going to look at all these other fields within there that will give you information about the malware. And you go through each of those steps. And then you get to dynamic analysis, and really you're probably doing both at the same time because when you do dynamic analysis, you launch the malware in virtual machine, and you kind of
Mm-hmm.
have to wait for however long you want to wait, and so you do the static analysis during that time as well.
Sure.
So yeah, I mean there definitely is a methodology to it. Although, like I said, I don't know if it's as well defined as what we see with like pen testing and what you will find on like OWASP's website.
Mm-hmm. So, are there any other tools that you said you created Mastiff? Are there any other tools that you've created that you use on a regular basis. I'm baiting you here a little bit because I remember one you had mentioned called DDP.
Oh, wow, yeah. So, I actually didn't write DDP. A coworker of mine did.
Okay.
Um, I don't honestly. I don't use that too often anymore. But what DDP was, um, so way back then, the way that we did malware analysis is we had sandboxes on physical computers. We weren't using virtual machines.
Mm-hmm.
And the nice thing about that is uh, you don't have to worry about virtual machine detection
Mm-hmm.
because you're running it on the bare hardware. The disadvantage to that is you have stacks of computers in your office, and you tend to wear out hard drives pretty quickly because you're constantly rebooting the system. But when we were doing that, what we had to do was figure out a way that we could apply images to the hard drives very quickly to reset it. So we could have used something like Norton Ghost or something like that. But what we decided on doing was using the dd command in Linux.
Sure.
So we'd install the Windows VM on the system. We'd shut it down. We'd basically take a forensic image of that partition. And then every time we rebooted, we just reapply that DD image to the partition, and we'd be back to square one. Our image would be reset, which was great, except that disk images are huge.
Sure.
And so you don't always want to be copying a 4 to 8 gigabyte image every time you reboot because that's going to take a while. And so what a coworker of mine did was he realized that what we could do is we could take a disk image, make some modifications to it, like install, let's say, Adobe onto it, shut that down, take a new image, and then basically create a diff of the two DD images, of the two disk images.
Mm-hmm.
And then he wrote DDP, which would take the original base image, apply the diff to that base image, and then we would have the updated image, updated disk image. So essentially all we'd have to do is make one copy, and we'd have our original base image, and then like all these really small modifications of that disk with all the different tools that we had installed on it. So we'd have one that had Adobe 9 and one that had Microsoft Office, and instead of having to store 5 or 6 4 gigabyte images, we'd have one 4 gigabyte image and one 100 meg image, which was substantially smaller and easier to apply.
Okay. So I was actually looking for that a few hours ago, and I found the website it's on. Do you mind if we mention the site that it's on, or is that something you don't want to mention?
Go ahead. Absolutely.
So I found it at corelogic.com. That's KORE logic.com. And there's quite a few tools on here. I mean, FT Times looks like not only are you doing analysis like with Mastiff and those, but you're also doing things like e-discovery and forensic collection as well.
Yes. Yeah, so F Times is another one that my coworker, his name's Clayton Monroe, wrote. F Times is a really great tool. It's so I like to say that so that Netcat is like the Swiss Army knife of networking.
Sure.
Of network tools.
Love it.
F Times is like the Swiss Army knife of forensic tools. It was originally made to do timeline analysis, so you can give it a file system, and it's going to grab all the time stamps off of all the files on there. But it also does things like hashing. To hash all those files. You can do differentials between two different timestamp images to find the files that have changed between the two. And it does a lot more than that. I mean, he actually created it, and they modified it so that it could find, if I remember right, deleted files when you were carving using entropy analysis when they were if you just had like this disk image that you didn't know where the files were, and they actually used it to win the 2006 Digital Forensics Workshop Challenge.
Nice.
So it can do a lot of really cool things. I highly recommend checking it out.
Okay. So if somebody wanted to use Mastiff, are all these, you said these are all dual on the website, it says they're all dual licensed. Do you release everything under GPL in this case?
Yeah, so Mastiff is all the tools that are listed on our website, I believe, are open sourced. Mastiff is open sourced using the Apache license, I believe.
Okay.
And so anybody can take it, download it. If actually you go to our website, you'll be linked out to a private Git server that we run,
Okay.
with at least with the Mastiff code on there. And then we also, I think on GitHub, we also have a repository, which is just a copy of ours. You can download it from there. I'll say that if you're gonna run Mastiff, I would grab the copy out of Git because it has a lot of bug fixes that I haven't applied to the official version yet. But yeah, I mean, the reason I wrote Mastiff and made it open source was because I wanted people to use it. I wanted people to expand it. It's all written in Python. Even if you don't want to modify a whole bunch of stuff, it's really easy to add new file types or new analysis techniques into it. And even if you don't want to run it, Mastiff is actually included in Remnux, the Linux distribution I mentioned earlier.
Okay.
So you can just download that and it'll be ready for you. And I guess kind of giving you guys an exclusive here, we're actually planning on putting Mastiff online within the next couple of months. So similar to the way that sites like VirusTotal work, we're going to have a web interface that somebody can upload a file and then Mastiff will analyze it for you and it'll put the results there for you. And I think what we're going to do as well is by default, everything's going to be made public. But if you contact us, we can work out something where if you want, your files will not be public. Nice. Which I think is a big advantage because anything you upload to like VirusTotal, the results are public. Anybody who has access to VirusTotal, all the researchers will be able to get at that file.
Yeah.
Our goal with Mastiff is to have that at one end, but also have at the other end where for maybe certain people they can upload things, get the analysis, but that stuff is still private, so they don't have to worry about that getting out into the wild or people to know about it.
I like that idea. I like
you
that idea.
You got to worry about disclosure issues when you're uploading that if it's being shared out to everybody.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And I say this in my class, and I'll say it here. All the sites like VirusTotal and ThreatExpert, any public sandbox that you can upload things to, they share with researchers. So if you upload something to it, it's going to be in researchers' hands. I mean, in fact, the Google Aurora attacks, the original infection vector was found because somebody had uploaded that to VirusTotal, and somebody was kind of going through the VirusTotal archives and found, hey, this malware is on here. It has Google hard-coded IP addresses and server names in it, and it was around the time of Aurora, and that's how they put two and two together.
Okay. All right.
So
Mr. Betcher,
can I be in the
right?
Can I be in the list, the private list, where I can just call you and say, hey, I got something for you, and I don't want it to be made public?
Sure. We don't know how we're going to do that yet. Whether that's going to be like a minor fee or something like that. But you know what? Give me a call. We'll work something out.
All right.
Cool.
So, Tyler, one of the buzz terms of 2014 is threat intelligence. Does threat intelligence as a service help in preventing a malware intrusion? I mean, does it buy you anything, or what's your opinions on that?
I think, like you said, it's a buzzword. And I've seen good threat intelligence out there, but I've also seen really bad threat intelligence. I think like with everything, there are definitely some good threat intelligence feeds out there if you can get your hands on them. But you still kind of have to take the data for what it's worth. It can definitely help, I think, a company if they have a good threat intelligence feed coming from somewhere to help detect or prevent attacks or malware within their organization. But you still have to be careful. I still haven't seen a threat intelligence feed yet where I would be comfortable with just blindly applying it on like a firewall or a proxy server as a block list. I've been on in past jobs. I've been the recipient uh, um, of similar lists, of similar like threat intelligence lists, where it basically said block all AOL.com email addresses. And while we probably want to do that anyways, for malicious
Yeah.
reasons or for malware reasons, probably not. So it's still an up and coming, I think, tool set and industry, the threat intelligence industry, and it's only going to get better. But we still have to, in my opinion, we still kind of have to weed through some of the cruft that's out there.
Your class at DerbyCon sold out pretty damn quick, and I wasn't able to get my foot in the door there. Are you teaching anywhere soon? Again?
I will be teaching it again. I typically only teach it at like 2 or 3 conferences a year. Uh, as of the moment, we don't have anything scheduled um, to anything scheduled where where I'll be teaching it. Um, but I'll say 2 things. One, I have taught it for organizations privately or for groups. So I've been contacted by companies to come in and teach my course for that company itself, or for like a group similar to something like an InfraGard have contacted me to either run like a 1-day course or 1-day version of the course, or the 2-day. And I've done it that way as well. But I'll also say we've been toying around with the idea of somehow doing an online version of the course. So I guess if anybody's interested in that, start shooting me some emails, and if we get enough interest, we'll start looking into that a bit more seriously.
Yeah, that would be awesome. Some personalized training, or online web training. I go to those things all the time. They're really excellent, and especially if you do a web conference or something, you can always get really good audience participation in that case. So.
Yeah, absolutely. That's kind of what I'm thinking of. I'm not a big fan of like recording it because the techniques and the tools change so quickly. We'd finish recording it once and we'd have to redo it again to stay current.
Sure.
But yeah, it's something like that, like a webinar, or something a bit more interactive.
Okay.
So I haven't quite figured that out yet.
All right. Well, Mr. Betcher, do you have anything else for us?
That's it, in the interest of time.
All right. So I wanted to thank Tyler for coming. I wanted to read this little thing before we go. It was a terrible, indescribable thing, vaster than any subway train, shapeless congeries of protoplasmic bubbles, faintly self-luminous and with myriads of temporary eyes forming and unforming, as pustules of green light all over the tunnel, filling front that bore down upon us, crushing the frantic penguins and slithering over the glistening floor that it and its kind had swept so evilly free of all litter. H.P. Lovecraft wrote that in The Mountains of Madness to describe the Shoggoth, who Mr. Tyler goes by on his Twitter handle, the Sec Shoggoth in this case.
Yes.
And that is also his blog, is secshoggoth.blogspot.com. I'm correct on that, right?
Actually, I think it's securityshoggoth.blogspot.com. I actually own both. I don't know which is the main one. Actually, you're right. I apologize. It's secshoggoth.blogspot.com.
Yes, I've been a fan of H.P. Lovecraft for years, so when I found out Sec Shoggoth was coming on, I was like, ooh, goody. So so his Twitter handle is Sec Shoggoth. He's on there quite a bit. Let's see, what else do I have here? Your DEF CON videos, I believe, are on Iron Geek's website. We'll be posting a link in our show notes for that. And thanks Tyler for coming on. We want to do a podcast on reverse engineering. Maybe we'll delve a little bit more into reverse engineering in the future. And we'd love to have you back on for any other content or topics that you'd like to talk about. Maybe we always say that to all of our interviewees, and we mean it. We're here to educate, and if you're wanting to educate, we're a open vessel or an open book, and feel free to share your knowledge with us.
Absolutely. I'd love to come back.
Right on. So, Mr. Betcher is at Betcher Pwned. I am at Brian Brake on Twitter. We have a Facebook fan page, just hit about 4,700 followers, which is very impressive for us. We're on LO. You can look for me at Brian Brake, all one word. And Mr. Betcher's, what are you on LO?
Be Betcher, I believe.
Be Betcher, that's right. Okay. Are you on LO or any other social networks, Tyler, you'd like to mention?
No, just the typical ones: Twitter, LinkedIn. That's pretty much it.
Okay. All right. So we do have an RSS feed, and we're on iTunes. If you want to leave some feedback on iTunes, we'd appreciate it. Right now, we don't have hardly any. So if you are an iTunes user, if you love those things, please leave us some feedback if you like the content. So that was it for this week. We're getting close to the end of the year here. We've got a few more podcasts left, but I think after December 15th, that's going to be it for about, I don't know, till mid-January. So we're going to be here for another couple weeks, and we hope you are too. So that was it for this week. Have a great week. Hope you come back real soon.
Bye-bye.